He's deeply contemplated the Bible's messages and exhibited an attraction to God from an early age. As an inquisitive child, Maharaj had many unanswered questions until 1969. While attending the State University of Buffalo, he met his eternal spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. In appreciation and gratitude to Srila Prabhupada for the sacrifices he made in order to deliver souls from rampant materialism, Maharaj joined ISKCON. Although he was admitted into medical school, Maharaj gave up any pursuit of career he was planning as he realized that many persons became physicians to treat the physical body, yet few became doctors to help others on the spiritual platform. Maharaj received his first initiation.
Make it shorter. Make it shorter.
Sure, Maharaj. Maharaj received his first initiation and second initiation in 1971 and 72. In 83, Maharaj accepted sannyasa, the renounced order of life. Since then, Maharaj has been serving ISKCON Society more than over 50 plus years. He is a relisher of Bhagavatam. He is known to give a minimum of 2 classes a day non-stop over many years. And at times he reaches out devotees across different time zones. He is also known to personally reach out to devotees and for his amazing commitment to respond to email communications within 24 hours. Through his careful cultivation, there are robust spiritual communities in several major American cities, Guyana, India, and China. One very important thing that I wanted to mention about Maharaj is his kind and loving personality that inspires followers to take devotional service easily and strictly. Maharaj is also serving at GBC for years. Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you for permitting me to talk a few words about you. Hare Krishna.
Okay, just some corrections. I'm not available 24 hours a day for answering email. And yeah, there was another message that you shared that needed some correction, but I forgot. But that's okay. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanyavadi Paschatya Desatadine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Beautiful photograph of Srila Prabhupada, yes?
Yes, Maharaj.
Chaitanya Charitamrita Krishnadas Kaviraj writes one line out of many that's very pertinent to our topic for this evening. True eloquence is truth concisely spoken. True eloquence is truth concisely spoken. These 4 principles that we'll be discussing this evening are an example of true eloquence concisely spoken. As you know, we will soon be observing Gaura Purnima, and when observing Gora Purnima, our thoughts and our dedication of service and concentration and meditation and worship goes to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And these four items, four elements are the essence of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission and message, concisely spoken. So I want to proceed honoring Krishnadas Kaviraj's concisely spoken message and go forward with these four elements that are the cornerstones or pillars of Krishna consciousness, which is the manifestation in our present time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission under the guidance of our founder, Acharya, Srila Prabhupada. Books are the basis. We'll start there. As we all know, Srila Prabhupada sacrificed his everything, health, time, vitality, to give transcendental knowledge to the world. Why? Because books are the basis. One of the phrases that he would speak from time to time is Sarve Sukhino Bhavantu. Sarve Sukhino Bhavantu. Let everyone become happy. Sukha. Sarve, everyone. Bhavantu. Let them become happy. So, what's the standard of happiness? Well, we'll look at the other side. Another phrase that I appreciate and meditate upon is Prabhupada's statement, the root cause of suffering is ignorance. The antidote for ignorance is knowledge. Light is the antidote for darkness. Where there is light, darkness cannot stand. Where there is knowledge, ignorance cannot stand. And when ignorance is not standing, we know what is standing, what is prevailing. It's knowledge. And how is knowledge transmitted in this age of Kali? Prior to this age of Kali, through sound. In the age of Kali, through books. Here we see Prabhupada writing something with a pen. Of course, he had many methodologies for writing. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement similarly has books as the basis. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not personally write, other than what we know as Shikshastaka, just 8 verses. And in those 8 verses, the essence of awakening real happiness, Sarve Sukhino Bhavantu, through the chanting of the holy name. Because when purification takes place, and we're going to come to purity also, books are the basis, purity is the force. When we come to purity, we'll understand more about what that means. But books in the written form is a Kali Yuga manifestation, but it's the same knowledge, jnana, vijnana, realization, realized knowledge from our realized acharyas coming originally from the personality of Godhead, and for this age through Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates, the volumes and volumes and volumes of brilliance from our predecessor acharyas in the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, prolific writers of books in especially Bengali and as well in Sanskrit. Many of you, I'm sure, have been listening or viewing this wonderful gift that the GBC strategic planning team has been offering to all of us. 75 different classes giving illumination on different aspects of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. We hear from our founder Acharya, that's our postgraduate study. Within it is everything. The pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the lives of his followers, the gifts and qualities of his principal associates, loving exchanges, until we get a real picture through books of what real happiness is. Sarve Sukhino Bhavantu. Prabhupada cherished his book publication. We have heard many, many cases where whatever Prabhupada was absorbed in during his busy day, as soon as a new book would arrive, everything would stop. Whatever was going on, whoever was in the room, everything would stop and all attention would go to examining and appreciating. Look at his smile. Look at the radiance of Prabhupada's smile and see how happy his servant is seeing Prabhupada's radiant smile, holding to his head this publication of Back to God, Bhagavad Gita as it is. His dedication, of course, was to his spiritual master. And behind his spiritual master was his spiritual master and his spiritual master, and ultimately Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Prabhupada was an instrument of that mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to flood the world with love of God. We find this in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Adi Leela chapter 7, where the Panchatattva plundered the storehouse of love of God. They broke open the seal and began eating its contents and distributing it liberally, and the contents increased and increased. And in that mood, Srila Prabhupada wanted us to receive that same storehouse of love of God, break it open, eat its contents and distribute it, and watch the contents increase and increase. That's the happiness of Srila Prabhupada's smile. At times, it is said, he would sit and, as you see, as busy as he was, he would read his own books, or he would have devotees read and he would sit and listen. And he would sit for a long time, not become drowsy as we become drowsy when we simply sit and listen. And from time to time, on occasion, Prabhupada would say, in a deep mood of meditation, I have not written these books. Krishna has written these books. The personality of Godhead is situated in the heart of those whose hearts are pure, and he gives transcendental knowledge and inspiration, and it comes out in the form of their writings and their speaking. But we know the written words of our founder Acharya are even more significant than the spoken words, because very carefully he's selected, knowing that for 10,000 years, this cornerstone of the establishing of Krishna consciousness throughout the world would be preserved. So his books are vital. It's our life. That's what vital means. Without symptoms of life, your vital symptoms, you're dead. This is our spiritual life. Receiving, ingesting or assimilating this knowledge in Prabhupada's books, and distributing this knowledge profusely. in assistance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Panchatattva. Why? Sarve Sukhino Bhavantu. So that by this inundation of loving attraction for Krishna, the worldly disturbances will be like the water in a rice field. All the weeds will not grow. You don't have to weed the weeds. The water in the rice field keeps the weeds down, and just the rice grows. So the proliferation of books is such an essential part of those who are followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Books are the basis. Preaching is the essence. Oh, I know. Remember, one of the things at the introduction is I give 2 classes a day. Today, I'm giving 3 classes, and sometimes it's 4. Preaching is the essence. And what does preaching mean? What does preaching mean? You can say what it doesn't mean, and we can say what it does mean. Preaching means being an instrument. What it doesn't mean is through false ego, establishing how much I know and impressing people how much I know, and look at my information basket. I have so much information in my information basket. Let me pull out this one. Let me pull out that one. And people go, wow, you have a lot of information in your information basket. That's not what preaching is. Preaching is where your heart, we'll get to the heart shortly. When the heart is pure, one is simply an instrument, just like Prabhupada is gesturing with his mudra finger, making a point. Sometimes he would speak about the microphone that's right in front of him. The microphone is just an instrument for gathering the sound of Prabhupada's voice. And through electronic technology, it transmits that signal to the recording system or the broadcasting system or whatever. So the preaching is being the instrument, nimitta, being the instrument of who? Being the instrument of Krishna, or being the instrument of Vyasadeva, or being the instrument of Shukadeva Goswami, or being the instrument of the cyclic succession, being the instrument of our founder Acharya, giving the message in a transparent way, just like an instrument takes the signal from someone's voice and transmits it. Like that. No false ego. No false ego. No false ego. What's left? No false ego. What's left is purity. And when, as Prabhupada said, one who has life, he will preach. And preach doesn't mean I'm up here, you're down there. Let me show my kindness and help you come up to where I am. That's not what preaching is. Preaching is from the heart. There's life. What's that life come from? It comes from hearing. When hearing takes place properly, there's cleansing of contamination, and there's awakening of our real life. We'll come to that purity principle shortly. Then, that's preaching. Resting upon Shravanam comes Kirtanam. When one has properly heard, purification of contamination, an awakening of the vitality of the soul is a natural consequence, and then one vibrates. Kirtanam. Our founder Acharya was tireless in his work of giving Krishna consciousness, even at an old age, not knowing how long he would live. Why? He could have just gone to Vrindavan, and like many people at the retirement age of their life are thinking, when I complete my career and family responsibilities. I want to go to Vrindavan and dedicate myself to Shravanam, Kirtanam, hearing and chanting. Now, that's wonderful. And along with that Shravanam, Kirtanam, this message of broadcasting widely around the world, as far and as wide as one can. This is the storehouse of love of God that the servant of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wants for their pleasure. At elderly age, with health difficulties, tirelessly Prabhupada went forward, breaking through all barriers of anything that was standing in the way to give the message of Krishna consciousness to the world. And because that was in his heart, Krishna reciprocated, empowered him, and gave him the gift of breaking through those barriers, touching people's hearts, and awakening the dormant Krishna consciousness within. This is a service to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Here's a nice photograph where Prabhupada is standing with his papers and his boarding pass, and like with the other businessmen going to wherever he's going to, some international travel, it looks like. And following the customs, this utility is the principle, is another application of this photograph, but to give the message, carrying the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and our disciplic succession. Some of the persons that Prabhupada wanted to reach included professors, scholars, intellectuals, government people, because Prabhupada understood in principle that if educated and influential people of this world can somehow understand this message, such persons can influence the world even more dramatically than he alone could do. So with that understanding, yad acharati shreshtas, Prabhupada aimed a portion of his preaching work to scholarly persons, such as this gentleman. I think that's Professor Durkheim in Germany. And Professor Durkheim was a nice man. He really admired Prabhupada. And Prabhupada gave generously to this professor. And where that professor is today, probably because of his age, he's in some other body somewhere, but more imbibed with the message of Krishna Bhakti than it was before he met Prabhupada, that's for sure. So he's in some new situation where he can be the carrier of that bhakti and give leadership to others because of his capacity inherent within. Here's another nice image of Prabhupada speaking to a religious leader, because religious leaders have followers. And if religious leaders, they don't have to give up their ism, their belief system, and their rituals and their practices. That's not the message of Krishna Bhakti. The message of Krishna Bhakti is love of God. Preaching is the message of love of God. And when there's obstacles to attain love of God, Prabhupada would point it out. When there was appreciation of some merit, Prabhupada would point it out. His message in preaching was to nourish love of God. And now we're moving to the final principle. Purity is the force. Now, it just so happens that yesterday evening, the ISKCON Houston Temple was part of their series, was conducting an every evening seminar on the Shikshashtaka verses. So I was requested to speak on Shikshashtaka 6, and I want to share with you some of the messages from Shikshashtaka 6 coming from our acharyas. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this. Purity is the force principle. I think you'll like it. In explaining Shikshastaka 6, I made reference to what Shikshastaka 6 is saying, according to Bhakti Siddhanta. It's on the cusp or the transition point from Bhava Bhakti to Prema Bhakti. It's leaving behind, in Shikshastaka 5, the Aishvarya Bhav of worshiping the opulences of the personality of Godhead and moving into simply dedicating oneself to the service of the name. That's Bhakti Siddhanta's paraphrasing of Shikshastaka 5. And when that takes place, the stage of ecstasy is experienced. The ecstatic love, especially from the gift of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is love on the platform of the gopis, or love on the platform of the residents of Vrindavan, whatever the rasa may be. That's the stage of purity. Now, we know that as Prema Bhakti, and I'm going to make reference to Jiva Goswami, who speaks or writes about this in Bhagavat Sandarbha. He uses the word priti, pretty much synonymous, slightly different in its implication with prema, stage of bhakti, prema bhakti or priti bhakti. So Jiva Goswami gives a definition of purity. I'm going to read it twice because it's so nice. Purity of the heart means giving up everything else and relying only on priti. Now, Shikshastaka 5 and the previous verses, where one is leaving aside, well, let's start with our dear friend false ego. We all know what false ego is. And along with false ego, the misconception of self, comes all kinds of contaminations, piled on, caked on, mountains tall, impurity. Impurities such as pride, greed, lust, anger, and so forth are 6 enemies. We're familiar with those. Purity means all of that is gone. Purity means false ego is gone. Let's go back to Shikshastaka 3, because we're anticipating the appearance day of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Let's hear from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on what is purity. So we can start with what purity isn't, or what impurity is. Being intolerant, being devoid of humility, wanting to have honor come to oneself, being reluctant to honor others. Shikshastaka 3. Leaving all that behind, that's impurity. And impurity, one more time, it's resting on false ego. Our dear friend. In the process of creation, even before there's a body or a form of life, false ego is there, and false ego clings to the jivas that are introduced into the Mahatattva. False ego is the first thing that we cling to, and it's the last thing to go. Purity means free from false ego. We find, back to books are the basis, or knowledge is the antidote for ignorance. When it comes to knowledge, Krishna speaks of knowledge in Bhagavad Gita. The first item of knowledge, humility. Amanitvam. Humility, we can say in the negative sense, is freedom from false ego. So what does humility look like? It's purity. And what's purity? Purity is nothing else is guiding my life and inspiring my life and driving me forward, except one thing. What's that one thing? Priti. What's priti? It's the stage of love of God. It's the emotion, and with the emotion, the activities. Bhakti is activity, practical activity, where there's only one purpose, pleasing Krishna. That's an emotion, and the emotion is connected to activity. The mind and the senses are connected to one thing, the heart, pleasing Krishna. That's purity. I'll read the sentence again. It's so nice. Purity of the heart means giving up everything else and relying only on priti. That's purity. Purity is the force. You can say bhakti is the force, but pure bhakti, what's pure bhakti? When there's nothing else. There are other things. And utility is the principle. We engage other things, but only for one purpose, with a purity of heart, that serving Krishna, it's everything. Well, there's obstacles in serving Krishna is everything. And that's our false ego and all the contaminations that are caked on false ego. So in this section that we read yesterday, where Jiva Goswami is describing, his topic is not to describe Shikshastaka 6, but I was feeling he was very clearly explaining it. He uses the example of Akrura. And Akrura, for example, had no pride, because pride is one of those contaminations. It's an impurity that is mounted upon or piled upon false ego. So here's a nice definition, Jiva Goswami's definition of pride. What's pride? Pride is characterized by something other than inner happiness. Great definition, huh? Pride is characterized by something other than any inner happiness. Now, what's amanidvam, adambitvam? Pridelessness. Pridelessness. What's pridelessness? It's where there is nothing other than the inner happiness of the soul. False ego is removed. There isn't a happiness through false ego. It's the happiness of the soul. What's that happiness of the soul? Pleasing Krishna. That's purity. How do we get free from that very stubborn false ego? There's one solution. What's that one solution? The one solution is purity. Purity where bhakti is cultivated, just as we heard from Shikshastaka 5. It's where other shelters, other than one shelter, are gone. That one shelter is service to the name. But that's our life. That's the life of purity. It's not just, here's a picture of Prabhupada. It looks like Prabhupada is chanting japa. Now maybe he's speaking something because there's a little recording device next to him. Maybe he's speaking something, but let's just say he's chanting japa. There's nothing else going on but the holy name from the image of Srila Prabhupada's chanting japa. That shelter and service to the name was Prabhupada's life. And a follower of Srila Prabhupada, to come to the stage of purity, is there's only one thing, service to the name. And that service to the name may take many, 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 many varieties of forms or expressions. Whatever those forms of expressions are, that is your psychophysical nature, do those things with the mood of service to the name. That's purity. And there isn't something else, because purity is an expression of love. I'll read it again. It's so nice. Purity of the heart means giving up everything else and relying only on priti. Relying only on priti. Priti is the expression of loving service. We're not there. We're in the sadhana stage. But sadhana properly performed in service to the holy name brings purity. It brings eradication of false ego, according to the teachings Prabhupada very generously gave us in Kapila Dev's teachings to Devahuti. Bhakti has the power to dissolve the subtle body, which includes false ego, the mind, and reliance upon material intelligence. Reliance upon priti is that standard of purity. So Prabhupada began the Hare Krishna movement this way, as we see. He spoke. There's a very nice recording of Prabhupada speaking this message. It goes like this. In the beginning, all there was the holy name. Now he had his Back to Godhead magazine, which he had done in India, but slowly he got Satsrup Maharaj and others to revive the Back to Godhead magazine, but there wasn't even Back to Godhead magazine. He had his few volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 1, but it was only a few volumes. It wasn't, there were no books to distribute. He had the holy name. So he explained in one class, nice recording of that class, where in the beginning, that's how everything began. He just had chanting. He describes, this is a photograph from Tompkins Square Park. Every day from 2 to 5, 3 hours, I would sit under this elm tree in Tompkins Square Park and chant. Didn't even have a mridanga. In this class, he said all I had was a little drum. So it's like a little bongo drum, not a suitable drum, but that's all he had. And then other people brought their musical instruments, like you see somebody in the back playing a flute and whatever else they had, some tambourine or something else. And they just chanted for 3 hours. And by that chanting of the holy name, the Hare Krishna explosion happened. Purity is the force. Purity is where there is no other dependence or reliance than priti. What's priti? Priti is this dedication, exclusive dedication. People were confronting their false egos. He just lifted them from false ego platform to the transcendental platform. There's a nice photograph of Srila Prabhupada giving Gayatri mantra to Vishaka. And he's showing her how to count and so forth. Prabhupada very liberally gave, in addition to the Hare Krishna come to the stage of purity. That's what he wanted. This purity. Vairagya, in the mood of detachment, to engage with something that's part of Krishna's total creation. You engage with that something in the mood of service to Krishna. Utility, that's the short phrase. Yukta Vairagya, engaging things in service to Krishna. Why? Because everything comes from Krishna. Everything comes from Krishna. So let it be utilized in service to Krishna. Spiritual personalities traditionally are in the category of monks. You using the Western phrase, monks. They renounce the world. They live in a secluded place, free from worldly gnast that's growing rampant all over the place, and live in seclusion, denying themselves and their senses from anything that's worldly, and going inwardly in contemplative and spiritual inward direction. The bhakti principle requires that same inwardness at the same time outwardness. That is, whatever there is in creation, if it can enhance the spreading of Krishna consciousness or to engage in service to Krishna in some way, it's to be engaged. Here's Prabhupada riding in a fancy car. I say fancy car because that's how reporters would criticize him or challenge him. Remember one time Prabhupada was picked up in a big limousine. So the reporter said, why do you ride in a big limousine? How many big limousines do you have? Challenging his renunciation. Prabhupada said it wasn't good enough. It should have been a gold car. And she was shocked. He was explaining because the spiritual master is a representative of Krishna. One should offer the nicest. And what's the nicest? A gold car is nicest. So it should have been a gold car. But they don't have the means, so they gave a nice limousine. So he was not shy to utilize in the mood of detachment, yukta vairagya, because that's the way real detachment, we'll say it the other way. Here's a teaching that Prabhupada speaks. Without knowledge, detachment is not possible. I'll say it again. Without knowledge, detachment is not possible. Now, someone can try to be detached because they don't like to suffer. But without knowledge, real detachment is not going to endure because attachment will resume because one wants to enjoy. So real knowledge, back to books are the basis, is connect all things. That's just utility is the principle. Connect all things with their source of emanation. That's utility. And so expertly, under the same banner as Rupa Goswami gave, which Lord Chaitanya gave, he lived a life of renunciation. Nothing is mine, but he engaged everything in Krishna's service. Like this dictaphone system, it enabled him to give the Bhaktivedanta purports widely using technology for the whole world's benefit. That was his interest. And here is Prabhupada in a recording studio. He would record all the instruments. Now, look at those headphones. That was so many years ago. Now the headphones are more souped up, but they gave him the best of equipment. And Prabhupada learned how to use that equipment, sat there and made recordings. He would sing, playing harmonium, and then hear the track. And while he was hearing the track, play mridanga under the influence of the recording system that somebody knew how to use. You see the microphone in the front left corner. Why? Utility is the principle. To give us, his followers, his transcendental voice and beautiful music recordings, so our spiritual lives could be enhanced. So utility is the principle. Let's go through them again. This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement concisely expressed. Eloquence, true eloquence is truth concisely spoken. So books are the basis. Preaching is the essence. Purity is the force. And utility is the principle. There's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, perfectly exhibited by our founder Acharya, and we're to follow in his footsteps. So, dear devotees, in anticipation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance day, meditate on these four principles as expressions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's gift given to us through disciplic succession, particularly by our founder, Acharya Srila Prabhupada. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Or Premanandi.
Hari Bol.
I save some time for some discussion if there's some discussion wanted.
Maharaj, this is Lilananda. I'm very grateful for your time and such an eloquent lecture in such a short time. As you said, the entire Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission is summarized in these four aspects. Maharaj, one question I have is, are these sequential in nature or are these independent in nature? Or I'm sure there is a dependence between them, but are they even sequential to begin with?
Not necessarily. I'm thinking specifically of how Prabhupada introduced Krishna consciousness, and he didn't have books. So Krishna consciousness need not be introduced with books. It can be, but it's not of necessity. But utilizing our senses and the faculties, capacities, everything, that whatever it is that Krishna has given to us, that's utility is the principle, seems to me to be the starting point and the synthesis of the others. But so it's not necessarily sequential. Purity is the force that's got to be there. We emphasize the purity in chanting and thus, in turn, the purity of all other forms or expressions of bhakti. So you could say it starts with purity. You can make an argument for any one of them. Sequentially.
Maharaj, I have one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Maharaj, sometimes I personally feel that I don't have the purity. At least personally, Paramatma says how pure I am, I know. But it also happens that sometimes when we preach, we actually see that the opposite person who is listening, there is some transformation, and I start doubting myself. How could it transform when there is no purity? Um, how should I understand that and how should I apply it?
Well, there can be a number of explanations of how that happens. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can use a dull instrument and do something wonderful. That's one. His potency is not limited to our transparency. The more transparent, the more transformation. But Lord Chaitanya can work through even a dull instrument. And another way of saying is, whatever purity is there, something is being passed on. So one can, even the most genuinely humble person expressing their fallen nature, etc., there's that humility itself is a form of purity, and Lord Chaitanya can work through that. We're just somehow, here's something that came in the 60s and early 70s when Stilson Judah was a professor from California, a sociologist that studied the Hare Krishna movement. He wrote books on the Hare Krishna movement. Hare Krishna and the Counterculture was the name of one of his books, sociologist. And he, in his book, indicated that many of the devotees who he interviewed became devotees, not from temple residing devotees, but friends. You know, at the time, our language in the Hare Krishna movement was fringies. Fringies means if you're not in, you're a fringy, or you're just a karmi. But the people that weren't karmis, but kind of like Krishna, but they weren't in, were fringies. So using that the ISKCON vernacular, many devotees became devotees through such association. They were carrying something. They were carrying appreciation. They didn't have purity, but they were carrying appreciation, and that appreciation was shared with others. And that appreciation ignited somebody over there. That little spark of faith ignited some dry grass over there. Maybe they were less dry than the dry grass over there, but they had some faith. So that's another way of explaining how Lord Chaitanya can act through someone who's a little bit dull. That's okay. He's very merciful.
Thank you, Maharaj. That carrying appreciation is nothing but gratitude, right, Maharaj?
Yes. Gratitude is the seed.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Teja Mataji has a question. Mataji, Hare Krishna.
Do I hear someone speaking?
Maharaj, I have one question. So in purity of heart means give up everything and rely on Preeti, stage of love of God. Maharaj, now when we come into Mahatattva, we were linked to the false ego. So how do I balance my false ego and get attached to Preeti, Maharaj?
How do you do what? Balance your false ego?
Yeah, reduce the false ego and get attached to Preeti.
Speak slower. How do you do what with false ego?
How do I bring down my false ego?
Bring down. Okay.
Yes, Maharaj.
Sadhu Sangha. And through Sadhu Sangha, whether it's gently or if someone is very close to you, they may have, shake you up a little bit and, help you become a little humble. So, through Sadhu Sangha, that's the best. Sadhu Sangha is the best medicine because it's in one phrase, it includes everything. The Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, etc. process. Through that Sadhu Sangha, you get everything. You bhajana kriya, anartha nivritti. Through Sadhu Sangha, you do with sadhus what sadhus do, and be very careful to avoid offense. And we know what offense looks like, and if you don't, you should learn what offense is. We keep up Sadhu Sangha. Let me share this with you because it's on topic. 2 weeks ago, I was in another city and I met somebody that I had not seen for about 20 years. And this somebody that I had not seen for 20 years took a leave of absence from ISKCON. And his reason, I understood, but I didn't confront him with it. He shared it with me. He had expectations of devotees after reading Prabhupada's books and being inspired by Prabhupada's books. Devotees should live by such and such standards and values. And when he got close to the devotees, including leaders who were devotees, they fell short of those teachings and standards. So he slowly, in his mind, he described this to me. Slowly in his mind, he kind of checked out. And he just checked out of association. No, I didn't ask him what practices did you keep and what readings did you continue. I didn't ask him those questions. But, he suffered a lot. And he looks a lot older today than when I saw him so many years ago. And I've known him for 25 years. So he's back in the saddle. He is proceeding more carefully. That carefully means without having expectations, holding up the value of the teachings, and those who he knows over a period of time are maintaining and striving to achieve. That's the sadhu, striving to achieve those standards, although they're not there yet because they have shortcomings like we all do, and seeking their association carefully, thoughtfully. So we don't, just purity through sadhu sangha, or overcoming our own false ego through sadhu sangha, is because we got false ego. We're going to be critical and judging, and you get close to people, and what happens? Get married and you find out who your wife or husband is. Until then, you were like, it's romance. And then you live together and it's, it's something else. You get to know the person, the qualities and faults. When you get in close association with devotees, including advanced devotees, there's qualities and there's faults because we're not perfect yet. Then false ego is going to rise up and do its thing. So we're cautious about that. So what do we put in place of false ego? Service. Service without false ego. So read, if you want to understand that particular question more deeply, read Canto 3, Chapter 25, Kapila Dev's teachings to Devahuti on Sadhu Sangha topic.
Sure, Maharaj. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj.
Somebody else on the screen want to speak something?
Yes, Maharaj. Prabhuji Maharaj, you can unmute yourself and ask questions one by one to Maharaj.
Teja Mataji, can we hear?
Yes. Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I just wanted to
Speak slowly because the transmission of sound isn't so great. Speak slowly and clearly.
Yes, Maharaj. Does Shravanam and Kirtanam increase the purity or just the Sadhu Sangha, Maharaj?
Well, when you're doing Sadhu Sangha nicely, you're doing Shravanam Kirtanam with the sadhus. It will increase and it will amplify because it's in the association of others who are doing the same. They will both increase.
Thank you, Maharaj. Mahalingam Iyer Prabhuji.
I think there is a lot of background.
Yeah, too much.
Sunil Prabhuji.
Yeah, Maharaj, I have a question if that's okay.
Yeah, let's look in the chat box after your question.
Yeah. So Maharaj, during Srila Prabhupada's time, it was in 12 years, Prabhupada created practically 10,000 preachers around the world. Everybody was preaching. And he told it's a preaching mission. And now we are 50 years later, and now so many things are given. Temples are available, books are available. So many things are there to read, so many websites, content. Now to become a preacher or to somebody, sometimes I come across some young devotees who are just 1 year in Krishna consciousness and they want to start preaching, and they are very passionate about it. They want to go and share. So sometimes I get perplexed whether I should tell them, okay, go share, what you have. You seem to be, your stress energy is really coming out. Just go, just go and do it. But sometimes also I'm worried whether they would do right job. But Prabhupada was not worried at that time. So should we be worried, or what should we do in that?
Beautiful question.
Thank you, Mama.
You know the phrase boil the milk?
Yeah.
Use the phrase boil the milk because in the beginning, everything was expansive, 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 expansive with whatever Krishna sent, expansive, expansive. He took many risks because of his age and because of the need and etc. The time with everything, all the factors were expand. And then to boil the milk is let's become qualified. We have members that have qualified members. That was novel. And let's take, for example, the standards that Prabhupada had for initiation. Over a period of time, the bar went up. In the initial phase, it was, quite liberal. And then the bar went up because it's boil the milk time. Now, in our present state of ISKCON, there's, the ISKCON disciple course, and there's so many other things that are part of boiling the milk, qualifying people before their initiation. So now you, Lilananda, need to make some evaluation on a case-by-case basis of, on the one hand, that not being so qualified, and the other hand, not want to stifle the enthusiasm. You get the idea. So case-by-case basis is my answer. And it requires some acumen on your part to be able to discern how to encourage and at the same time qualify. There's different ways of doing all of that case-by-case basis. And you may do as an older devotee may want to do 15 different possibilities from the menu of choices to help qualify somebody. I mean, you could say, for example, I would like to see all of our preachers minimally such and such. And you can begin preaching, but do this minimum such and such, and we'll evaluate. Whatever. The different standards can be there for groups or for individuals. We want to encourage. We don't want to stifle. We also want to qualify because we want the transmission to be done properly.
At present, Maharaj, I just want to share that at present, in our satsang group, we have 8 preachers, and we are hoping that it just increases. But one of the qualifications that we normally keep is at least they are chanting 16 rounds continuously for a period of time, at least in a year. And they are following the 4 regulative principles, definitely. And they have read the small books of Prabhupada, so they have good understanding, and they're regular to the Sangha, more importantly. So this is the minimal qualification that we keep, and then we see the enthusiasm and say, okay, you want to preach, so go ahead. Do you think anything else we need to?
You're not me and I'm not you. But let's just say you want to increase book distribution. When the person is going out and meeting the public, they're not just going to say, I'm sorry, but I'm not a qualified preacher yet, so I can't answer your question. They're going to answer questions. They're going to receive questions, and they're going to give association. So we want not just what, the qualification that you just described for a preacher to be our book distributors. We want everyone. Almost everyone. We want, large numbers of book distributors. So they're going to do some preaching. So you may want to consider different, maybe your idea of what a preacher is in a certain category, like a group leader kind of person is a preacher. But, there's the broader picture of what preaching is and the spreading of Krishna consciousness, like the Panchatattva broke open the storehouse of love of God and began distributing. Mm-hmm. And that was the mood of the Hare Krishna movement. And Prabhupada wanted us, and it worked. It spread Krishna consciousness. So we want that. We want people to be preachers other than, let's say, group leaders kind of preachers. We want them to have the capacity to give the mood and the message widely. Because statistically, those persons are going to meet people we're not going to meet. And they're going to be able to influence those people because we're not meeting them. So we want to qualify them to be, in some way or another representatives. So find a medium or a channel for persons who want to preach that will help qualify them. Because I know it helped me to do book distribution, to do what I'm doing now. There was a lot of heart cleansing, a lot of ego pouncing, and smashing and bashing from book distribution. It was lovely. And, getting clear the idea. It's not me. It's Prabhupada, and I'm the deliverer of Prabhupada's message. It was very helpful. But in the course, there was some preaching. And there was historically misrepresentation. So we want to train our book distributors in a way to be representatives, nice representatives, and expand the Hare Krishna movement. More that method than just our group leader kind of facilities of preachers, frankly. Both are needed.
Got it, Manas.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. I think there are some chat questions.
Okay, and we're 1 hour and 6 minutes into our class, so let's go quickly. What's your curfew over there? Do you have a time cutoff on your end?
Maharaj, your association is very rare. This is the first time we're calling you, so there's no curfew here.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll go a little bit longer, and because I have a schedule to keep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maharaj, there is a question from Anandram Narsimhan Prabhu. Hare Krishna Maharaj, Dandavat Pranam. There is an initial force with which a devotee come into bhakti. Sustaining the momentum to keep increasing the purity is very important. How do we keep this momentum going? What are the derailers to watch out for?
Well, my answer to this one is the same as the previous one. Sadhu Sangha.
Yes,
Where did we get inspiration to begin with? Go back to that well and get some more inspiration. Sadhu Sangha. And Sadhu Sangha is a phrase that means all the aspects of bhakti, bhajana kriyas particularly. So continue bhajana kriya in the association of devotees, and our enthusiasm will be sustained. Beware, saying it twice, of becoming complacent. Or, as we were discussing in yesterday morning's class, indifferent. That's one of the contaminations of heart that blocks bhakti. It blocks our chanting of the holy name is indifferent to the holy name, where the heart is not moved because we're just doing something mechanical. I'm chanting mechanically.
One second, I think. Yeah, sorry about that. I muted them.
Okay, thank you for muting them. Muzzling. Next.
Maharaj, Sunil Prabhuji is asking this question. As I do not have purity currently, trying hard through sadhana, anarthas come out in my behaviors. How I influence my family, so that how I can influence my family so that see my pursuing Krishna consciousness is seen in positive way. The same question I too have, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Those of us sitting in this room could not follow what you said. The question was a good question, but I couldn't understand it, and the others in the room couldn't understand it. We're shaking our heads like, what was that?
Maharaj,
I can. I'm Sunil, so I can share my question. So I currently there is a lot of impurity, and every day when I do sadhana, I pray to Krishna to reduce my impurity, right, and overcome my anarthas, and but however, in our daily life, many anarthas come out in my behavior, and I'm the only one who is following Krishna consciousness is in my home, in my house. So how I can influence my family so that they see my pursuing Krishna consciousness in a positive light, and they don't see this as just as a phonetic and not having a real like parampara, right? They're following as a Vaishnavism and so on.
This is a classic question. I like your question. Many people they may not have this situation where they're the only person in the family practicing, but there are lots of people that the only person practicing, or they're practicing in some family, friends, parents, this and that. They're like raining on the parade. They're not happy. So how, especially given there isn't purity inside, that's the obstacle. The obstacle can be an opportunity if it's seen and approached. In India, you say tackled, but if it's approached properly, it can be an opportunity. That is to say, Sunil, your goal needs to be brought more in focus. What's that goal? You can say, for starters, we can say purity of heart. And I'm not there yet, but I want purity of heart. And I want my family members at least to be acknowledging and accepting of that purity in heart. So one of the best ways that family members will be appreciative of is how your qualities or your character are improving. Say it negatively. If you become irascible and argumentative and displeasing and selfish and, this is really bad. But if it goes the other direction, they may not understand what you're doing and even appreciate what you're doing. But if they see character improvement, their eyebrows will go up and go, wow, look at him. Now, the challenge for you, spoken in the question, is I'm not pure yet. I've got whatever it is, manifestations of impurity that come out. So you try to overcome it. It amplifies your purpose of achieving purity because you want not only to become pure, but you want others to be accepting of this method of purity, whether they take it up or not. At least they're appreciating this is good for Sunil. Whatever this thing is he's doing, it's good. I've seen it happen with many families. It takes some time. Some are more stubborn and some are more, soft. But when they see there's character improvement, they may not like what you're doing or even understand what you're doing. That kind of happened in my family. They just saw, wow, he's a really good brother, or he's a really good son, or he's a really good whatever, and they became accepting because the character and qualities that they saw. That's going to be convincing or compelling or inducing them to be accepting. And then eventually, more than accepting, participating. But, it takes, may not happen, and it takes a long time generally. So it's you now double up your desire for purity because you want to help them become appreciative of the bhakti process. And you should keep good association. The Sadhu Sangha principle once again. And the devotees reach out to Sunil and give your, kind support and association because he's got a challenging situation to deal with, aside from his own shortcomings. It's, family members that aren't so appreciative of bhakti. So be kind to him. Give your good association and encouragement. Okay, one more question, and then I'm going to depart.
Maharaj, this question is from Mahalingam Ayyar Prabhuji. There is a lot of distraction during chanting. How to chant attentively?
How to chant attentively? I think I've heard that question before. Mind is, probably number one in the challenges of bhakti. And I'll provide you with a very simple formula that if it's practiced, whoever asked this question or anybody else that's interested in helping the distracted mind become less distracted. This is a Bhakti Siddhanta teaching that I have found it's very powerful. You ready?
Yes.
Bhakti Siddhanta says there are the senses and there's the mind, and they quibble. However, when the ear, spiritual ear, he uses the phrase, not the material ear, because the material ear reads sound as a material sound and it doesn't have the same effect. He uses the phrase spiritual ear, or we could say, genuine hearing. When you genuinely hear, what happens? The mind becomes captured. The mind becomes subordinate to the ear. The mind thinks, I'm in charge. The ear is in charge. And the superiority of the ear over the mind is accomplished when you hear. So focus on the sound. Easier said than done, but that's the principle. Hear the sound. Whatever you have to do to hear the sound, chant loudly, stand on your head, do cartwheels, hear the sound. Hear the sound. It's something internal, something external. Hear the sound. Hear the sound. And stay with hearing the sound. When the mind wanders, you bring it back to hearing the sound. That will conquer the mind. The mind becomes subordinate. In Bhakti Siddhanta's language, that mind and the other senses will no longer quibble. That's his words. It will no longer quibble. You're in charge. That's Vedic process, Shravanam. But if you don't hear, the mind is going to be in charge, and the mind is, restless, and you know what the mind is like when it's not curbed. You bring the mind back by the process of hearing. And I think that's what my time permits. So it's been nice spending some of my morning, your evening with you just before Gaur Purnima. So off I go into the next service that I have. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki Shri Gaura Premanandi.
Hari Bol.
I also thank His Holiness Romapada Swami Maharaj by chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra once. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama.
Hare Krishna, 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 Hare.
Thank you, Udayanand Prabhu and Sucharita Mataji, for arranging this amazing session by Maharaj. And purity is the force. Though we have heard many a times, we hear from many sources, but I'm so sure that many of us are touched by the simplicity in which Maharaj has put forward what we should do when we are in trouble. So thank you once again. Let's thank Sucharita Mataji and Udayanand Prabhu with 3 loud Hari Bols. Hari Bol.
Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
And by God willing, we may also have Bhakti Raga Maharaj in future. So thank you all. Wish you all a very happy Gaur Purnima tomorrow. Please come to Vaishnav Seva Kunj. We're all waiting for you here. Hari Bol. Hare Krishna.
Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
Dandavat pranam.